This is Mark Guerrero. Welcome to East L.A. Music Stories. My guest is Harry Manaka, a Hammond organ player, musician. And before I introduce Harry, I need to lay some groundwork to explain how this ties into East L.A. Music Stories, and it certainly does. A few years ago, somebody that I didn't even know emailed me to tell me that he read a book, and it is called Chronicles of a Sansei Rocker by Harry Manaka. And that a picture of my band was in the book and my name was in the book. And so I bought the book and read it and was amazed because I had no idea that while we of the East Side Sound of the 60s, what I call the golden era or the golden age of the East Side Sound, when that thing was happening, there was a parallel scene happening on the other side of the LA River with mostly Japanese American musicians. And they were very much influenced by the East LA sound. And this whole parallel scene was going on, and I had no idea about it until I read the book. And it was a massive scene. So, welcome to the show, Harry.
Thanks for having me on your show, Mark. It's an honor to be here.
So, tell me, how did your scene begin, and how did the East LA scene influence it? I think you said you would come even before you were a musician to the East Side and watch the shows.
Yeah, yeah. When I was going to school, there would be dances, and at the dances there was live entertainment, and it was primarily Chicano or Hispanic bands. And my wife, who grew up in East LA, went to Roosevelt High School. She also would go to these same dances. And, there were bands like the Premiers and Cannibal and the Headhunters, your group, the Emeralds, the Ambertones, and of course the Midnighters that played at these shows. And I would go to these shows, and the manager of the Emeralds, Ray Ballesteros, he and I developed a friendship, over time. And I started hanging around with the Emeralds, and I'd be backstage, and I would go and visit him after the show. And this is when his son Aaron was still a little kid. I remember Aaron carrying some of the band's equipment in and out of the shows, and
Mhm.
he and I developed a friendship, and later, played together.
I must interject something here. You mentioned my band, the Emeralds. It wasn't my band. I was in the Emeralds for a short time in 1970 for about 6 months and really enjoyed playing with them. But during that period, I was not in the Emeralds. As a matter of fact, this is funny. I think I told you this before. When I bought the book, there was indeed a picture of my band, Mark and the Escorts, but it was labeled as the Emeralds.
Okay, yeah,
So, but anyway, yeah, so I did have a relationship with the Emeralds and I did play with them for a little while, but it was not my band and I was not
yeah.
in the band in the 60s.
You were with Mark and the
Right,
Escorts.
right.
Were you the leader? You were the
Yes,
leader.
I was Mark and I still am.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so you were watching those shows and you saw those people in their prime and when they were young,
yeah.
in their
I
prime.
did, and I was very impressed, and I was very envious. Mark, I used to sit back and listen to the shows and think, I want to do that, or I'd like to do that, and I had no idea though how I could ever break into, that particular scene. Uh, so I just kind of had to wait my time.
So you mentioned to me before that you took some piano lessons when you were a kid, but you weren't actively a musician at the time you were going to the East LA dances.
I wasn't a musician with a band or anything, but I loved rock music. I loved R&B. I loved that Hispanic sound. I loved the Motown sound, and I somehow wanted to just get into a group so I could do some of that stuff too.
How did that start? How did you start your first band?
Well, it started out first with mostly Hispanic bands playing at the dances. And then over the years, I'd say in the mid 60s to the late 60s, there were Japanese American bands that started up trying to emulate some of the East L.A. bands. And, some of the early ones were the Prophets and the Chosen Few and a group called the Rich and the Poor, which were actually Filipino guys that started playing and that started a group. And there was also a group called Something Else, and they were also from Boyle Heights. Uh, Two of their members were from Boyle Heights, went to Roosevelt High School, and they had started up in the mid 60s. And the drummer for the band had gotten drafted into the military. He was from Gardena High School. And the band was about to break up because I think the other members figured, if the drummer was going to go, then maybe the rest of the band would just kind of fall out. And I was there that night, and I don't know what made me do it, but I went backstage and I said, I play keyboards, don't break up. I think, you still have some music left in you. And they auditioned me about a week later, and I knew all their tunes, having followed them for a while. I knew the keys that they played them in. And so we needed a bass player too at the time because, well, when their drummer was drafted, their bassist, Barry Tambara, he had just finished his college degree and he wanted to start teaching. So he too was leaving the group. So when I volunteered to audition for the group, they were short a drummer and a bassist, and the keyboardist was about ready to leave the group too. So um, we ended up getting a guy by the name of Bobby Flores, who I'm still playing with to this day. And a couple weeks later, we were playing.
I'd like to mention now that you mentioned Bobby Flores that most of the band members of the groups in your scene were Japanese American, but there'd be often a Chicano in the band, or maybe a Caucasian, or maybe an African American mixed in. So some of them were multiracial, but most of the musicians were Japanese American.
Yeah, I'd say, a lot of the bands that began playing in the late 60s were primarily Japanese American. Something else, it was like the United Nation of bands.
Right.
Our singer was black, our bassist was Hispanic, I was Japanese, the guitarist was white, and the drummer was he was a percussion instructor at Johnny Thompson's Music over in Monterey Park.
Mm,
So we were quite mixed.
yeah. Speaking of the Latino members, I noticed in the book one of the drummers was Nick Urrutia, and I knew him. I think I went to Griffith Junior High with him, maybe Garfield High School. I remember him. Do you remember him?
I do. Nick was a hell of a nice guy and very gentle soul. And he passed away, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. He was a heck of a nice guy, and it was unfortunate because he was also kind of the historian or a record keeper or something else. He had a big TIAC, a reel-to-reel outfit, and
Mm.
he used to record the band. And I know that he made entire recordings of different nights where we played. And I was searching him out because I wanted to get copies of that music from him. And I got a hold of his sister, and his sister was the one who told us that he had passed away. Yeah.
Another Chicano that was in one of the bands was a former bass player for El Chicano, and I never quite remember how to pronounce his last name, but it's something like Joe Pereira or something like that.
Oh, yeah, Joe Pereira.
Yeah, do you remember
Joe
him?
was actually I think he was mixed. He was Filipino Hispanic. So I think one of his parents were Hispanic and the other one was Filipino.
Well,
Yeah.
Joe played with El Chicano after
Yes.
their original bass player, Fred Sanchez, left for a while. So
Yeah.
he was sort of a mid-70s El Chicano for a while. Really good
Yeah.
bass player, very funky, very busy.
Very busy. Yeah. He he always wanted to play Tower of Power stuff, and
Makes
that
sense.
that funky bass line of the Tower of Power bass line. A lot of times, John DeLuna, who was our leader, would say, Joe, can you just tone it down a little bit?" And Joe would nod his head, "Yeah, yeah, okay, okay." Next thing you know, he'd be back to that funky,
So you're talking about John DeLuna, who was the original El Chicano drummer?
yes, yes. He and I, and Royce Jones, who was the vocalist for our group, who went on tour with Steely Dan and then later Ambrosia. We had a group back in the late 70s, or it was 1977, 78, that was, I think, right on the verge of doing something pretty good. We were starting to play some original stuff and coming up with some original stuff when my partner at the Baby Lion got shot and killed.
Well, that's a chapter we're going to get into in depth in a little while. Maybe we should hold off on that.
Okay, yeah,
I want to finish talking about the scene that was happening in the late 60s and into the early 70s. So I was surprised too when I read your book. One of the lead singers in one of the bands was somebody I went to junior high school with at Griffith Junior High, and his name was Daryl Yoshihara. I knew him not well, but I just saw him around campus. I knew who he was. I had no idea he was a singer in a band
yeah.
till I saw your book.
Daryl was very talented and, unfortunately passed away a few years ago.
I heard.
Um, he played with a group called the Prophets, who later became the Carry On when the Prophets split apart. And he was one of the original players in both the Prophets and Carry On. Uh,
Mhm.
Very talented individual.
And the band that came out of your scene that became the most famous was Hiroshima. So they started out as a different group and evolved into becoming Hiroshima.
Uh, yeah, they used to play at community events, and the Kuramoto brothers, John and Dan Kuramoto, used to live right down the block from my parents' house in Long Beach, West Long Beach, while they were going to Cal State Long Beach. And Dan was actually the first director of the Asian American Studies department at Cal State Long Beach. And he started playing the saxophone, and they started playing at community events, and they were doing their own thing. They were doing original stuff, and the rest is history. They kept at it, and they're probably the only band that came out of the Asian American scene that developed any sort of national notoriety.
Yeah, great band. The venues you guys played, I know one of the main places was the Roger Young Auditorium, which I played once. And then you had that women's club. Tell me those main venues you guys played.
Yeah, the Parkview Women's Club, which was in the Crenshaw area, um, up in the Baldwin Hills, that was, it was viewed as once you had played the Parkview Women's Club, it was like you had made it. That was the place to play at, and the Roger Young Auditorium was on that same level. Those two venues were probably the most popular back in the Sansei or Asian dance party scene era.
Oh, explain what Sansei means so people will understand.
Sansei is a Japanese term for third generation Japanese American. And there is Issei, and the Issei is first generation. Those were our grandparents who first emigrated from Japan. The Nisei are the second generation and are the children of the Issei. And then the Sansei are the children of the Nisei. So we're third generation.
So tell me about the Parkview Women's Club and what that was like.
The Parkview Women's Club I don't think it ever was meant to play to big crowds or anything. The capacity was something like 300. It was part of an actual country club, a golf course at one time. But after it was sold, um, the women's club in that area turned it into just like a social place to gather. And the Japanese Americans started using that place as a place to host different dances and parties and things. And they would hire the bands that were available to play there, and it became one of the most popular, if not the most popular place to play at during the era. And most of the popular bands from that Sansei dance party era played at Parkview Women's Club, including our band.
And why did you call it dance party?
It's more or less it's a term that I kind of made up for my book. So I just call them dance parties, and I call it, the dance party era to have it named something.
Right. Now, did you guys play at the Old Dixie as well once in a
We
while?
did. The old Dixie, Basie's Hall, the Aeronautical Institute. I don't know whether you remember that, but
Mm.
over on Wilshire. Uh, the Blarney Castle over on Western. Uh, yeah, there were all sorts of different places, but yeah, the old Dixie. Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah. I noticed on The Chosen Few it says The Chosen Few, kind of copying the East L.A. bands, The Midnighters.
Yeah, yeah. It started to become in vogue. Our band never did that, but I know that a lot of the bands took on the.
And as far as the repertoire that you guys did, I would assume it was just what we did, which was R&B, some British Invasion, and East LA stuff. Right? You guys would do Midnighter tunes.
We did. One of the tunes that the Midnighters played that used to be one of my favorites. It was originally done by a gentleman by the name of Oscar Brown Jr., and it was a song called "Brother, Where Are You?"
Mm.
And I don't remember Oscar Brown Jr.'s version as much as I do Willie Garcia's version of Brother, Where Are You? And they used to play the heck out of that song. I mean, not that the song was difficult because it's very easy to play, but to be done well and sung well, I think was a skill that Willie had. I love hearing him play and sing "Brother, Where Are You?"
You guys did a video recently about your scene, and the main song that was playing was Dreaming Casually, wasn't it, by the Midnighters?
It was, yeah, it was, yeah. That was another favorite amongst the crowd, and all of the Midnighter songs I think were crowd pleasers, and I think I mentioned the fact that whenever the Midnighters would play at one of the dances, it truly was like the second coming of the Beatles. I think a lot of the young Japanese girls would have rather have seen the Midnighters with Willie G than they would have liked to have seen the Beatles. I mean, as
Wow.
weird as that may sound, I mean, they were extremely popular.
So tell me
They
a little
were.
more about your Emeralds tie, because I know they were one of your favorite bands, and like you said, you had a relationship with their manager, Ray.
Yeah, I got to know Ray fairly well. He and I actually went out to eat at a coffee shop a few times after the gigs, and it was mainly he kind of took pity on me. I was always hanging around, always there, always asking him questions, and he was very patient in giving me the time, just in terms of how he managed the group and how happy he was to be associated with music and, how he wanted his son, Aaron, to become involved in the music.
And
And
Aaron wound up being the drummer for Tierra,
yeah,
great drummer who passed away also a few years ago.
yeah. In fact, September 11th, 2020, it's a date that kind of stuck in my mind because I had talked to him just probably a month and a half before that. Yeah, very
But,
tragic,
yeah.
yeah.
At the time, did you know the leader, Anthony Beret, leader of the Emeralds? Did you talk to him at the time?
I didn't talk to him, but I used to listen to him, and I think I've told you before that Anthony, I mean, he seemed to be a stickler for doing the music as it's played on the original record. I remember him scolding some of the guys in the band for taking too long on their solos. And he was telling them that, people don't come to hear you play a long solo. They want to hear the record played like the record. So I remember that because that's a philosophy that I took into my band, you know. It was like I told the members of my band, people don't come here to listen to you play a solo. They come to listen to the music as it's played on the radio. So, do your job and play it like it is on the radio. And I remember that from Anthony. So I don't know how he is now, but
I think it's pretty much the same, I think.
uh,
But speaking of that, I don't want to jump too far ahead. But when I first contacted you, when I read your book, I contacted you from your website and we talked on the phone. And it just so happened that like a month or two after that, you were going to have a symposium in Little Tokyo and a panel discussion with veterans of your era, the musicians. And so I brought Anthony with me. You
yeah.
invited me. So Anthony and I went, and I think we were the only Caucasians in the building. Probably about 300 people. But you introduced us in the audience, and it was a tremendous thing to hear all the stories from the various band members and to learn more about your scene, which was incredible. And so I couldn't believe that this was happening so close to where we were, and very few of us knew about it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess the main ones that knew about it were the ones like didn't the Emeralds and the Midnighters play on the bill with some of your groups in some of these venues?
Often.
Yeah, so they knew about it, but there was no internet back then and Facebook, and we didn't hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was an honor to have both of you come that day, and yeah, I really appreciated that support by coming out because you know, like I said, truth be told, the East L.A. groups were my idols, from back in the day.
So I remember reading that one of the things that stopped your scene was the Parkview Women's Club. It started to experience more violence and maybe some gangbangers started showing up. Tell me about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's very unfortunate, but there was a gang element that would come to the dances, and they were groups like the Triangle Boys from Triangle Bowl over in Boyle Heights, and then over on the west side there were the Ministers and the Buddha Bandits, and groups like that, and a lot of them would hang out, by the stage door, and then when the bands would arrive, they'd grab a piece of equipment and just walk in the door, to avoid having to pay cover charge or pay to get in. And that was all right to do that, but what wasn't all right was when they started fighting, within the venue. And I don't know what they were fighting about. It was always, in talking to some of them now, they'd say that they were fighting over turf. And I always thought, what the hell does that mean? The turf ain't going anywhere. The turf is always going to be there. But you'd hear like in the middle of a song, we'd be playing a song and somebody would yell out East Side, and then somebody from the other side would say, "Well, F you, West Side," and then all of a sudden a chair would go flying across the floor. And it got to the point of where the fighting actually escalated to where the combatants were fighting up on stage.
Oh,
And
gee.
it would carry over into the parking lot, and some of the cars would get damaged, and knives were drawn. I don't ever remember seeing guns at that time, but it wasn't uncommon for somebody to flash a knife. And actually, I remember this was before the 911 days, emergency, but I remember ambulances having to come into the parking lot to take away people who had been stabbed. And it wasn't long after that that the management at both Parkview and Roger Young said, that they can't have dances at their places anymore because there was too much liability for getting sued or people getting injured or maybe even killed one of these days.
So that was like the beginning of the end of the scene
It
after.
really was, yeah, and it's unfortunate because places like Parkview and Roger Young really the ambiance at those places lent themselves to kind of that nostalgic feel of that past. And, once those venues were taken away from us, I think, although the dances eventually were held at other places and restaurants and places like that, it was never the same.
What year would you say that was? Was that early 70s already?
That was probably late 60s, early 70s by when that happened. Yeah, I
Wow.
miss those days.
So right after I contacted you and we spoke, I think I talked to you that night and I immediately Facebook messaged a friend of mine from Japan, Shin Miyata. So let me explain who Shin Miyata is. He was a Japanese fellow from Japan who became enamored with the Chicano culture because he had seen the movie Boulevard Nights. But he became enamored so much that he actually went to East L.A. and spent like a year there. He wound up living with a Chicano family, and he fell in love with the culture and the music and went to see all the bands. He went back to Japan and he formed a record company, Barrio Gold Records, and started releasing East LA bands in Japan, such as Tierra, East LA Sabor Factory, Slow Rider, Mezcla, Quetzal, Village Callers, to name a few. So he would always ask me. He came to my house at one point when he was in LA, he came all the way up to Palm Springs, somewhere like in early 2000s.
Wow.
And he was always asking me, were there any Japanese American musicians part of the East LA sound? And I said, I only knew of one. And it was a gentleman that played with the Counts, who were a very popular band, very good band, Roy Matsunaga. And I was thrilled to tell him, hey, there was one guy, a Japanese American guy. He was a guitar player. He played a Stratocaster. He was in one of the most popular bands. And that's all I could give him. So when I found out about your scene, I thought, man, this guy's gonna freak out. This is like the mother lode. So I immediately Facebook messaged him and I said, hey, I just found out there's this whole history of a Japanese American scene happening parallel to ours at the same time. And I gave him your information and he wound up contacting you. And you've spoken, right? You have kind of a friendship now
We do. In fact, I visited Shin a couple years ago
in Japan.
in Japan.
Wow, tell me about
Yeah.
it.
Based on our introduction, Mark, Shin and I started talking, and he became interested in my book, and he asked for a few copies of the book, and he wanted to translate it into Japanese,
Wow.
and he wanted to market it there in Japan, and I told him, let's hold off on that for a while, but let's maybe get involved in some sort of project. And one of the things that we've discussed is having a cultural exchange between, the U.S. and Japan somehow. And I've talked about maybe taking a group over to Japan and playing over there and having it kind of like as a vacation package for people who would like to go over there, spend some time learning about Japan, and then maybe also at the same time being ambassadors for teaching some of the Japanese people some of the things about the U.S. So it would be an exchange between the U.S. and Japanese in Japan, uh, and also, serve as an opportunity for my band to be able to not only learn more, but maybe play in Japan. So that's still kind of one of the things that's in the works. But Shin is always, he's got a lot of ideas and things. So I think what we're trying to do is determine whether or not there'd be some sponsorship interest, either in Japan or here in the U.S., to do something like that. So, we're still talking.
Great. That sounds like a great idea. I saw
Yeah.
Shen a few weeks ago. He was at the opening of the museum exhibit I'm involved with right now. You heard about it. Did I send you a link to it?
Yeah, you did. I'd be interested in checking that out.
Yeah. It's an exhibit called A Great Day in East L.A. that my partner and I started like 10 years ago that wound up being a museum exhibit. Piero Giunti, my partner. And we had a tremendous opening, and there were probably a couple thousand people went through it on that opening day. And Shin was there. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, and he came all the way out to see it. So,
Wow.
yeah. Uh, so tell me, didn't you go play in Japan back in the day, back in the 70s?
We did.
Talk about that.
I played with a group called Long Time Coming then. And we had a friend, his name was, well, still is, Ken Sato. And Ken was one of the 10 original investors in a company called DHL, you know, the, um, the letter carrier and
Hmm.
the package carrier. It always puzzled me, Mark, because I would always wonder why would people pay all these big bucks to have a document overnighted from the US to Japan? Why couldn't they just throw a few extra stamps on the document and send it through the post office? But little did I know. But DHL, of course, became one of the biggest carriers in the world, and Kenny was one of the 10 original investors, and um, he became the first president of Japan DHL. So he said that he had some friends in Japan, or he had a contact in Japan that would be interested in bringing a all Sansei or all Japanese American group to Japan. And much like a lot of things you hear back in the day, I thought, yeah, 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 sure. But the next thing I knew, he was presenting us with a contract and saying that we needed to get our background checks and visas and passports ready because they were for real. They wanted to have us. And in the summer of 1972, we actually spent that summer in Tokyo, Japan, playing in a club called the Penthouse Club in Tokyo, and it was the first time that a all Japanese American band had played there, and it was it was a cultural phenomena. It was I think both unusual for us, but I think unusual for them to see their Japanese counterparts in America be able to play and sing in English. So, yeah,
How was your reception? Did they take to you guys?
very, it was, they wanted us back after that summer. They wanted us to re-up, re-sign the contracts. But, we had a couple guys that were, one guy that was married with kids and another one that was getting ready to get married. And they didn't have the same desire to come back. So one of the members of the group, Tina Fujino, the female vocalist, and I, we wanted to go back so bad that we started searching around for a few other band members to join the group and then go back to Japan. And one of those was my friend Harold Payne. And Harold is, he's a fairly well-known musician, and he plays with my band right now, my current band. But so Harold and a couple of his bandmates, he was in a trio. They were doing their own material. So I thought, this would be ideal for us to get together and maybe do some original stuff in Japan. And we were all set to go, but the Japanese government were reluctant to give white guys, hakujin, they call them,
Hmm.
visas or passports. It was a case of reverse discrimination. Of course, I can't prove anything, but Tina and myself, who were Japanese, I mean, we were easily able to get renewals on our visas, and we already had our passports. But Harold, and the other two guys who were white were not able to get their visas. So,
Now, the 3 months that you did spend there, I mean, what was that like for you culturally? A little bit of a culture shock, or how did it feel for you to be there?
both Tina and I loved it. I had visions of living in Japan for a while. In fact, my thought was if I go back, I'm not coming back to the US for a while. And I love the food. I love the politeness of the culture, the genteel aspect of how people treated each other back there. I loved it back there. And I thought I was going to end up spending a good chunk of my life, if not forever, back in Japan. So the whole country and that experience was something I was really excited about and enjoyed.
So, was it after that that you wound up buying your own nightclub?
It was, my friend David Jingu, who was a guitarist with The Chosen Few, he had quit that group and he was finishing up at school. And he was coincidentally finishing up in Japan. He was doing a year abroad, studying in Japan. And when he got back from Japan, he said, let's get a group together. So I knew by that time I was kind of friends with Aaron Ballesteros. And, I know Aaron wanted to play. And so we recruited him. And Bobby Flores, had been playing with the Midnighters on and off. And, he wanted to play again. And then Royce Jones, who had been on tour with Steely Dan, he was looking for a regular steady gig. So he wanted to play. So, okay, let's get a group together. And we started playing. And I mentioned in my book that it's a big drag having to lug around the Hammond B3 on one night stand.
And the
So,
Leslie.
yeah. So, we looked for clubs to play at, and the Baby Lion Club over on Washington and Vermont in Los Angeles was, seemed like a good place to play. So we started playing there first as a replacement for a group called the Third Generation from Hawaii. And pretty soon the owner said, you guys are now the house band. And I felt badly for the Third Generation because they were my friends. And, when they took a vacation, that was our entree into being able to play at the Baby Lion. And it seemed like now all of a sudden we got them kicked out of their gig. Uh, but anyway, we started playing there and we played there from oh, 73 to 76. And then in 1976, they wanted to sell the place. And we kind of roundabout ended up, David and I, the guitarist, ended up buying the place. We weren't the original buyers, though. There was a very nice Korean couple that wanted to buy it. And they, they said that before they bought it, they wanted to talk to me, and by then I was kind of handling the business of the Baby Lion. And they wanted me to sign a 2-year contract that we would not leave the Baby Lion. And, I told them that I can't do that. It was up until that point, we had always operated on word of mouth and a handshake. And I told them, if I shake your hand and tell you we're not going anywhere, we're gonna honor our gig. And I don't know, they seem to, or their attorneys, I think, wanted to lock it down to where we wouldn't leave. They wanted it locked down for 2 years. And, when I told the rest of the guys in the band, they said, no way. So I went back to the original owners of the Baby Lion and said, we can't sign that contract. And so the Korean couple ended up backing out. And the owners of the Baby Lion were devastated because they had been working 7 days a week and they just wanted to rest. And then I just, off the top of my head, I just said, we'd be interested in buying it. Of course, we didn't have any money. So, I had no idea what I was talking about. And so I told the owners that, we don't have any money. We'd be interested in buying it. And I was flabbergasted when they said, we'll finance it for you. They said, you guys bring in a big crowd, you can pay. You'll eventually be able to pay. And so that's how David and I purchased the Baby Lion. Nothing down.
And how
It,
long did you own it and run it?
well, we ran it up until my partner got killed in 78.
Oh my God.
And
So was that about 3 years or what would you say?
probably closer to 4 years. Yeah.
So talk about how your partner was killed and what a tragedy that was.
Yeah, yeah. We would have not only our band play, but Hiroshima played there. We'd have our friends come in and sit in with us. We'd have our friends' bands come in and play. And that night, a band called Free Flight, friends were playing there. And at the end of the night, as the band was packing up their equipment, there was a commotion at the bar. And what had happened was a young Vietnamese couple had come in and sat at the bar. And, one of our Baby Lion regulars got into a argument, or it wasn't an argument, but he must have made a wisecrack about the Vietnamese guy's girlfriend. And the guy took offense to that and he had a gun on him. So he took the gun out and he was pistol whipping him around the face and cut his face up and everything. So David, my partner, went to try to break the fight up or to break the altercation up. And the guy just turned the gun on him and shot him point blank in the face. So he was, it immediately killed him. And it turned out it was a 357 Magnum. So it
Jeez,
was a
jeez.
powerful gun, and both David and I owned guns at the time. And I'll tell you, Mark, I have nothing against the Second Amendment and gun ownership and all that, but after what I saw a gun could do, the damage it could do to a human being, I could no longer own guns anymore. So I took mine over to the sheriff's department right away and turned them in. I said, you could have them, destroy them or sell them, or I can't own guns anymore. So, yeah,
And your partner was a musician, a fine guitarist, was he?
he was a guitarist and he was good. He was, I mean, he could play anything. You teach him a lick, and once he was taught, I mean, he knew it, and he was one of the best that I've ever heard. Uh,
And I
one of the
recall from
best that
the
I've ever played with.
And I recall from when I read the book, reread it a month ago, and he came from some kind of a great family, and didn't he have something to do with,
Yamaha.
yeah, and wasn't it, yeah, that, and was there something to do with a garden or something in San Antonio?
Yeah, the Jingu Gardens, the Japanese gardens in San Antonio. They're still there. It's still there.
His family owned it or what?
His family, I don't know whether, yeah, I think they do still own it. But his family was originally from San Antonio, and his grandmother, Miyoshi Jingu, was actually a cast member on My Three Sons.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, show business kind of was ran in their family. But after that, I just didn't have any desire to own a nightclub or play music. So I pretty much hung them up. It's like I stopped playing and ended up selling the restaurant, selling the club.
And by this time you already were married, and did you have children?
We didn't at that time. But that was, Mark, I'll tell you, that was one of the not only the most traumatic experience that I had in my life, but I mean, it still weighs on me. I still think of, what I could have done to have prevented that. And David was 27 when he passed. And all of my kids now, my kids are in their 40s, it's,
Right. And as I recall, you were at home when that happened. You had already left, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So going back and witnessing all that and having to deal with that and having to deal with David's mother is, I mean, it's not something I'd wish on my worst enemy.
Can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's something, like I said, I carry to this day, and I still blame myself for it. Was there anything I could have done?
No.
I even think of things like, if we had never gotten the band back together,
Right, right,
or if we
right,
hadn't have bought the club, or if we
right.
hadn't have done this, and it's
Survivor's guilt or something. It's not really rational, but people do that.
yeah, yeah, and I was in years of therapy over that too, and the last thing I would ever want to do is blame David for any mental issues that I had, but it's something that's weighed on me for up until this day.
Um, so there was a gentleman that became a very good friend of yours, Gerald Ishibashi. He was like a concert promoter in Orange County, and you started to partner with him a bit. Tell me about that.
I did, he got my number through John Kuramoto, who is Dan Kuramoto's brother. And he called me up out of the clear blue one day and introduced himself and said he had this concept of putting together a band called the Sansei All Stars, which would be an all Japanese American band to play oldies but goodies. And he wanted to put on a concert at or a show at the Kona Hawaii restaurant in Buena Park. And he didn't know a lot of the band members in the Japanese band, so I helped him put together a band, and it turned out to be very successful. And he started doing multiple shows per year, and he was thinking of continually improving on the shows, and he wanted to snag a big name for to headline one of our New Year's Eve shows, and Mary Wells, Motown fame, was available. So we did a show. I think it was 1982 or 83, where Mary headlined the show at the Biltmore Bowl at the Biltmore Hotel in L.A. And it was sold out. It was promoted by the old radio station. I don't know if you remember it, KRLA.
Of course.
Yeah. And, and then Gerald went on to promote, pretty much every big name of that particular era. And, our band got a chance to back up a lot of those acts. If they didn't have a backup band, then we were the backup band. So I got to play with, thanks to Gerald, with a lot of those groups back then.
Yeah, I've spoken to him on the phone a couple of times for quite a while. He's a very bright guy, and yeah, just about almost every major group you could think of. I mean, some big time people started playing in his promotions.
Yeah, yeah. He started this thing over at Newport Beach, Tastes of Newport. I don't know if you've heard of
I've
that,
heard of
but
it, yeah.
yeah, where they would have a lot of the name groups out there, and he would promote these free on the beach concerts, and they turned out to be like big happenings, at the time, and yeah, Gerald's always involved doing business ventures like that. Very bright guy.
Yeah. So you sent me a video, well, last night, I believe it was, and it was you guys playing kind of recently, right? Your band?
Yeah, last year,
Boy, it
last
sounds great. Now, let me say, all the musicians are top flight. I mean, the singers, the players. You were playing Reelin' in the Years by Steely Dan, which is challenging, but great band, you know.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I always looked at it as, my enjoyment came out of putting together, the best band that I could. And I've always had a saying that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
That's what you want, yeah.
And yeah. And, if I was always okay, I always thought that there were a lot of musicians that were better than me, but I always looked at it as there were also a lot of musicians that weren't as good as me,
Yeah,
you
listen, that's
know.
true of every musician. I don't care how great you are. There's always people better,
Yeah.
and you're always going to be learning and improving. But let me tell you, I was listening to your organ playing. You're fantastic, man. You were doing a solo, and I mean, you got some quick hands there, and you got a great organ sound, and I mean, you sound great.
Oh, thanks, thanks. But it's that old thing of when you surround yourself with the right guys and they are playing for the good of the group rather than to try to show off.
People that are
It,
team players, people that listen, people that know
yes,
when
yes.
to play, when not to play,
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
get in the way of the vocals, all the good stuff.
It's back to the Anthony Bourret philosophy.
Well, there are those who believe do it like the record. There's those that say, do it kind of like the record, but put your own thing to it. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
worked for him for sure.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I say that, I remember him scolding some people backstage and that I'll tell you, Mark, that lesson stuck with me because I
Yeah,
started using that same philosophy,
it
Don't try
works.
to show off, just play for the good of the group.
Right, right. But like, for example, the Eagles are known for playing just like the record. As a matter of fact, Don
Mhm.
Henley does not let any lead guitar player just, go off. It's got to be
Yeah,
just like the record, and that's fine. Then you get people like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, or Bob Dylan, or Neil Young. Every time they play it, it's different. They
it's
might even
different. Yeah,
change the groove, and both things work. It's just a choice. But
yeah.
generally speaking, the audience wants to hear it kind of more like the record because people get pissed off at Dylan because he plays songs they're familiar with in such a different way that they don't recognize, and they get pissed.
Yeah,
You can go too
yeah.
far on it, but it works for Dylan. Um, so you have some things coming up. Are they like you've done a few concerts over the last few years? Tell me about that.
Yeah, we've done five so far, and I was ready to schedule another one. Um, But with all this stuff that's happening politically, with ICE and
Oh my God.
the raids and all that, in J-Town, Japanese town, a lot of the businesses are boarded up now,
Wow.
and you see a lot of graffiti and stuff there. So I'm committed to wanting to support those businesses, but also I don't want people to feel afraid to come to a show.
Are they
And
doing raids for like Japanese immigrants?
yeah, yeah.
Holy shit.
So, and Hispanic, workers down there. So, um, a place that I'm considering is La Mirada Theater for the Performing Arts.
Hmm.
It holds about 1,250 people. So I always like to go for the smaller venues because I want people to be like right on top of us to where they kind of can see us playing and where we can actually interact with them on an ongoing basis. And I told you that our shows, they're not concerts, they're not plays, they're not like Broadway shows, but they have elements of all of those. We have Harold Payne who does improv. I mean, he does it really well. Um, so, we always have him do like an improv piece. We make videos and we set the videos to music. I've got a camera team that is, you know, um, Oscar Academy Award level. Plus, I'm fortunate to have guys that they play well. So, and they play well together, and they enjoy what they're doing. And then I like to, at the same time, tell a story, about what people are going to listen to, or what the political nature of the time was, and people seem to enjoy that. So it's a combination of improv, uh, kind of storytelling, playing of music, just general banter, and people seem to like that. And so each show has been something like that. And we've tried like the 250 seat theater. We've tried the 1,000 seater. So now I'm thinking I don't want too big, but 1,250 sounds right to me. And so we had scheduled one for this summer, but my wife has had AFib. You know what AFib is?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's a heart kind of, it's your heart beating irregularly, and she's had that, and she had some heart issues when she was a child. So they were reluctant to go operate on her because of that former history of when she was a child. But she went in this past couple weeks ago to have her procedure on her heart, and it seems to have worked. So fingers crossed. If it does, then I'm going to go ahead and commit to this thing at the La Mirada Theater and just start advertising the hell out of it.
You talking about this summer or next summer?
Probably end of this year or early next year.
Now, are these sit-down shows or not for
Yes,
dancing, just for
sit
sit-down
down.
shows? Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I'd certainly like to go to the next one, so keep me in the loop.
Oh, yeah. I'd be honored to have you there as a guest.
So is there something we missed? I think we covered quite a bit of stuff, you know?
People have always said, you know, didn't you ever play any original stuff? And it's funny because I I actually I've done original stuff for commercials, jingles and stuff. And I had a friend who was with an advertising firm, and he had asked me one time whether or not I could put together something for one of his accounts, Broadway Federal Savings and Loan. And I mean, I didn't know, but I said sure. And so he put me together with a group that eventually became Bloodstone.
Mhm.
Take to the sky on a natural high.
Mhm.
And so we did about four commercials back in the 70s for Broadway Federal Savings and Loan. And I sat in with Bloodstone a couple times, and they said, why don't you come and join our group? And we'll do this and that. And this was before they were famous. And it was funny because I said no, because I always thought that our group was capable of doing it. We just never put our mind to it. And I always like to say that we were kind of famous for not being famous. Yeah, but we had fun in our time, and we still are. So, and I'm honored that people still, I mean, we still continue to sell out our shows. So it's like our shows always sell out, and sometimes they sell out in less than an hour. So,
Wow.
yeah,
Well, we're all blessed to be able to play music, man. It's its own joy for its own sake, you know.
we are, Mark. It's like it is a blessing. I don't take it for granted. It really is.
So, in the spirit of the show, maybe say one last thing about the East LA sound that you were a witness to and how it influenced you guys. Just say something about that.
Yeah. It's like, even today I've got two Hispanic guys. Bobby Flores has been by my side for over 50 years, and Richie Gajate Garcia, he's one of the best in the business on percussion. In fact, how many people have a actual instrument named after them, or he's got the Gajate bracket, which is, standard wear for percussion players. They all of them have the Gajate bracket, So he's he was standing next to uh, what's his name, Frankie Valli this past summer when Frankie's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame was unveiled. That was Richie Gajate Garcia next to him. Uh, but those guys, I'm so thankful, Mark, that I'm not famous, but they stick with me. They like playing with our group. They're loyal to the group, and they always take time out of their schedule to play with us. So I'm grateful.
So, back in the day in the 60s, what venues in East LA did you go to watch these groups? Do you remember which venues they were? Like, did you go to the Big Union, the Little Union, Kennedy Hall?
Kennedy Hall, yes, yes. We played for a couple. They weren't talent shows at Garfield High School.
Oh, that's my alma mater.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you ever go to St. Alphonsus or the Montebello Ballroom or any of those?
Montebello Ballroom. Everybody's been used to. I mean, that was a hangout. Yeah,
Cool. Great.
but those were the days, Mark.
Yeah, man. It's a magical time. And we were young and everything was exciting.
Yeah,
So anything else you want to add, or is that about it?
I think that's it. It's. I look forward to following up on your show. Yeah, so I look forward to coming to hear you play and getting together in person maybe.
That would be great, man. I look forward to it. Thanks for doing it, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
I'll keep in touch. See you soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.